Well, Aylyffe, thank you so much for helping me with my project. Can you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I grew up in a space buff family. My parents were members of the L5 Society back before the National Space Society was created by them merging with another organization that I could never remember the name of. And I grew up wanting to be an astronaut. This is in the days of the shuttle. So in the 5th grade, I got glasses. And I'm pretty good at math and science, but I'm not exceptional. So I knew that I wasn't really going to be able to be a mission specialist. I had intended to be a pilot. And once I got glasses, this was long before LASIK or anything was an option, that route closed to me as well, because I was not going to be able to reach the skill level of piloting that was necessary to become a shuttle pilot. So I set that aside, let it lie dormant. And then about 4 years ago, my son got hugely into space when he was 2, thanks to an episode of Yo Gabba Gabba. And it just sort of rekindled everything. So I'm really excited. I love living in the time that we're living in now, with access to space becoming so prevalent, and with private competition being able to provide whole new realms of going to space, far more than NASA or any of the other national space agencies have been able to achieve. I might actually get to go finally after all these years.
That is awesome. And how old is your son?
He's 9 now.
9. And what was the name of that show you said that sparked his interest?
Yo Gabba Gabba.
Yo Gabba Gabba.
It was a Nickelodeon show aimed at toddlers. I don't know if it's still on the air, but it was one human character and then a bunch of humans in giant foam costumes to look like imaginary creatures. And they had adventures and sang horrible, ridiculous, basic songs. Classic kids show.
So what about that show sparked his interest?
Well, there was an episode where the characters were looking up at the night sky, and the human came down and said that this particular star that they all thought was so fascinating is actually a planet. And they went and they got in a rocket and went to the planet and visited the aliens that lived there and made friends. And he just was hooked. I don't know the specific thing that captured him. We watched that episode on repeat for a long time.
That's awesome. I think like Star Trek and Star Wars kind of inspired a lot of people about space as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed one person that had this other Nickelodeon show about a girl who was on a space station. She got grounded back to Earth. I forgot what the name of it. And I had never heard of it before either. I think it's called Xenon, I think is the name of it. But
might have to look it up. I don't know. We only found out about Yo Gabba Gabba because of Netflix. So
I'll have to check it out. But so after that sparked his interest, like what are some of the other things that kind of helped it grow and develop?
Well, not long after that, Buzz Aldrin came through town doing a book signing tour for his children's book about going to Mars, and it had some experiments to do to practice kind of the mindset and the skills, maybe some of the specific tasks that Martian visitors would need to do, or early Martian visitors. And so I took my son. That was probably the following, maybe that was 2 years later. It would have had to have been, because he was astonishingly patient in line, which I would not expect from a 2-year-old. But we got to meet Buzz Aldrin, who I had actually met at the Space Symposium in Colorado Springs forever ago when I was 9. So we both had his autographs now. And it was at that event that I met Ken Ruffin, who is a major leader in our local chapter of the National Space Society, the National Space Society of North Texas. At the time, he was our president, and he recruited me. And it's just sort of kept going ever since. My son is no longer hooked on space, unfortunately. I think there was a bit too much of it. I got a little over enthusiastic and dried up the well. but he still enjoys it. He just doesn't seek it out anymore. And he no longer wants to be an astropaleontologist. So I'm very sad about that. That was a
The
career field.
future is long.
So yeah, there were just, it was really those two kind of watershed moments with my son getting hooked from that one episode and then getting to meet Buzz Aldrin and through that meet Ken, that enabled me to really become active in the world of space fans and actually get to promote excitement and education about what the world of space exploration is like now.
So here in the North Houston Space Society, we need to recruit people like you too. So, so can you tell me kind of how they can recruit you and what lessons can I learn from that?
Well, Ken, I think, has been doing this for a very long time. So he has an extensive network of people in the community that he is connected to. So our organization has friendships with a number of local museums, with the Perot, with the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History, with various teachers, various schools. And so we're able to go do presentations at schools as well as at the museums. Anytime there's any kind of space event that comes through, such as that Buzz Aldrin event, he makes sure that we have the ability to set up a table and hand out goodies. We've got a foam board display of what it's like aboard ISS. We've got any number of papers, handouts. We used to have a lot of back issues of Ad Astra, but the most recent Moon Day at Frontiers of Flight Museum, which was of course the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, huge turnout, and I think we plowed through all of Ken's supply of back issues of Ad Astras. So it's really just about getting out there in the community and meeting people and talking to people and give them a little something to take away, even if you just go and get a one sheet from NASA's website and print out 50 copies of it. That's something that they have to remind them of you later on and try to rope that interest to get them to start coming to meetings.
That sounds good. And you mentioned you getting glasses is one reason why you felt like you had to give up the dream of being a pilot for a space flight. And I noticed that one of the two astronauts flying on the DM2 mission on the SpaceX had glasses on.
Yeah, so I see two possibilities for that. One is that circumstances have changed and now it's not such a big deal. Well, make it three possibilities. Another is that he got glasses after joining the shuttle program. And third is, of course, that when I was in 5th grade and all of 11 years old, I didn't actually know everything about the world and was just wrong.
That reminds me of an Oscar Wilde quote. It says, I'm not young enough to know everything.
Exactly. Definitely.
So you're thinking about actually going to space someday? I mean, that would be one of your dreams?
Oh, absolutely. I told my husband when we were dating that if I ever got the chance, he had a choice of coming with me or having a long distance relationship. I'd go in a heartbeat. No question.
So you're saying a little bit more than just a week in orbit, or maybe a week to the moon. You're saying immigration to Mars type of go to space.
That one is tougher because we've got the kids now. I would not want to be a first generation colonist for something as extreme as Mars, or probably even as extreme as the moon, because we're not going to be taking kids for first generation colonies for either of those. And I would not want to leave them behind unless they're 18 or so, and it's probably going to be a long distance relationship anyway because they're going to go away to college. What I am most interested in is orbital habitats, something like a Stanford torus in low Earth orbit, equatorial low Earth orbit specifically, so that we can avoid that magnetic anomaly over South America and we don't have to worry about the bumps in radiation levels at that point. So equatorial low Earth orbit, rotating habitat for pseudogravity, just as easy to reach Earth as it is aboard ISS. So that's what I want.
I'm not familiar with the magnetic anomaly over South America. Could you tell me a little bit more about it?
Oh gosh, I don't know a heck of a lot about it, but it is, I think that you can think of it as like a gap in the magnetic field that shields the Earth from solar and cosmic radiation, or a thinning. If you think about a blanket that's got a worn spot, and so the cold air in the winter gets through over your knee, but only over your knee. And so ISS is on a highly sinusoidal orbit in order to be able to have easy launch access from both Cape Canaveral and Baikonur. But that also means that periodically it goes over South America in the region of that magnetic anomaly. So there's a significant increase in the solar and cosmic radiation that hits the station and its occupants in those timeframes that it passes over that. The upside, or the reason that it's not been a major concern, is because nobody stays aboard ISS for a long period of time. Our record right now, I think, is Mark Kelly is at 357 days, if I remember the specifics right. And that's not long enough to do significant damage with one 15-minute pass through that spot a month. So he accumulated enough solar and cosmic radiation to equal half a dozen chest x-rays, which people get chest x-rays all the time. It's not that big of a deal. But if we were talking about a permanent human settlement and people spending their entire lives up there, children being born and raised up there, then it becomes a much more significant issue with radiation and the damage that that can do to living tissue. So that's why I want equatorial and avoid that completely.
And how soon do you think we might see a first settlement of that kind? I mean, like, how many years away on the most optimistic basis do you think that is?
I don't think we're going to do it, which is frustrating, because if I had $500 million, I could build one in 10, 15 years. I know at a very high level, because I'm not an engineer, what's required in terms of the overall structure of it. It would be, instead of the true Stanford torus, the original kilometer-wide donut ring, or kilometer diameter, major diameter donut ring, it would be a Kalpana 1 module, which is more of a cylinder, like a biscuit can. And I would do it half scale, because we've had recent research done that indicates that humans can actually adapt to more than one revolution per minute in order to simulate one full gravity at the Earth's surface. And so if we can go up to 4 RPMs, that significantly decreases the diameter of the merry-go-round that we need to create in order to use centripetal force to replace gravity. And by having that smaller hull, we have a smaller population size, but we also have dramatically decreased cost, an order of magnitude at least. So $500 million, I could do it. But there hasn't been a great deal of interest in it over the past 10 years. There's a niche, a little corner of the space world that has enthusiasts like me, but particularly with the Artemis missions and the reach to have a permanent setup, a permanent settlement on the moon, I think we're going to bypass Earth orbit entirely.
Well, I mean, don't you think that maybe a future outcome is use the mineral resources on the moon and say a moon space elevator to get those resources into Earth orbit might be sort of where the materials come from to build in orbit settlements like that?
I think that would be a fantastic path to take, but I don't actually know how likely it is. And space elevators are hard. I would really expect to see more of a linear accelerator and then some sort of catcher or very carefully planned alignment and launches so that it launches at just the right speed and just the right angle to be captured into Earth orbit. I think that's a more realistic avenue to get materials from the lunar surface to Earth orbit to build a station. But with the way the rhetoric around space settlement and lunar development has been going, it has entirely been about using the Artemis missions to prepare for going to Mars. There has been zero talk that I've seen involving using lunar materials to do anything at Earth, beyond potentially mining the rare earth elements that are currently mostly controlled by China and Russia.
Right. And I mean, I've seen some papers or studies done about maybe building solar panels using the moon's material and use them for huge solar-based arrays to do, you know, space-based solar power.
No, that would be an awesome use as well. Yeah.
Well, you said you think you could do it for $500 million. And I know Jeff Bezos actually sells $1 billion of stock a year in Amazon to fund Blue Origin. So there are people actually spending that order of magnitude of money on space. Just say hypothetically, I'm Jeff Bezos, which I wish I were, and you're pitching me the idea of spending $500 million to create an orbital space station. How would you go about convincing?
Well, the two primary obstacles to doing it are launch costs and construction. Launch costs are still problematic because we're still dealing with chemical rockets. We've made incremental improvements in the way we go about launching material out of Earth's gravity, but we haven't done anything revolutionary to make it cheap and easy. We've got more efficient rockets, we've got stronger rockets, and now thanks to Jeff and Elon Musk, we've got reusable rockets, and that's fantastic. That's huge. An analogy I've used before is that prior to those two and their innovations, the way we went to space was equivalent to, I'm going to go to the grocery store, and I have to throw away my car when I get there. Walk home. Next week, I need to go to the grocery store again, buy a whole new car, drive it to the grocery store, throw it away when I get there, which is just not really feasible. So reusable rockets are huge, but they're still chemical rockets, which are large and expensive and can't carry much. So probably 9/10 of the cost is launching our materials to space. After that, construction is an obstacle. The most useful material that we have currently is aluminum, because it's got a very high tensile strength, so it doesn't pull apart very well, but it's also cheap and easy. Spider silk, carbon fibers are significantly stronger, but very, very expensive. In fact, I don't think we've found a good way to replicate spider silk. So that would be challenging to do. So what I would do is I would form plates for the hull here on Earth, launch sets of those up, and probably initially rent space aboard ISS for that first batch of the construction crew to live on. And they would go out and form those hulls together into the first segment that could be sealed off into a pressure-bearing section of space station and have life support added to it. Then they could move into there. We could move out of, well, not out of, but further away from ISS. Still want to be able to reach it in case of emergency. And then just incrementally build up from there. And the reason I want to send up pre-formed hull plates rather than just a bunch of raw aluminum is because we don't yet have a great method for using additive manufacturing or 3D printing on metals. Right now, in order to 3D print aluminum, we need to fire a laser into a bed of particles in order to sinter them together into the shape that we want. You can imagine in an open microgravity environment, having a bed of particles is problematic. So we would be able to do it in fewer launches if we had the 3D printing we could do up there. But right now what we'll have to do is send up those hull plates until we have a segment that is able to do life support. And then we can send up more supplies at a time because we'll have a bigger place to store it. And incrementally, we'll be able to do more and more. And once we have a complete ring, we can spin that, get the centripetal force to simulate gravity, and at that point we can 3D print anything we want. So most of it is launch costs, which will very likely, based on economic theory, go down over time, just because we'll be doing so many launches. And so there will be additional innovations made. That's been the tendency for new industries, new inventions historically. And most of the materials cost will be for that first batch of hull plates in order to complete one complete ring. After that, it's gravy. Really, it's very straightforward, and it's things we already know how to do.
That's so this first prototype would actually be in the same equatorial plane as the ISS.
I think it would need to be, simply because the ISS is a place where we already have a habitat that humans can live. And so it's our supply base and our bolt hole in case of emergency.
That's interesting. Well, somebody should try that out. I mean, I think the neat thing that we're seeing, now is the ability to have independent groups actually make progress on multiple kind of pathways to space, as opposed to trying to have one single national agenda and trying to convince everybody that that's the way to go. I mean, people say moon or Mars. Yes, both.
That's one of the things that I'm so excited about, to be living in this day and age, is that we have the ability to experience that flexibility. It's amazing. I think that's been NASA's major handicap over the years, is that their overarching directive is at the whim of the president. So they have 4, maybe 8 years to get a project past the point of no return. And so the struggle that they've had is, instead of saying, like Elon Musk is able to say, my goal is to colonize Mars, and everything that his companies do is aimed specifically at that goal. NASA knows that its steering winds are going to change in 4 years or 8 years. And so they have to maximize all the possibilities within the same vehicle. And so they're not able to make any of their vehicles, any of their missions, as specifically targeted, as efficient, as lean as Elon Musk has been able to do. And that's, I think, been very frustrating for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's really amazing with like the Crew Dragon, how he already has 3 customers. He has NASA, he has Axiom Aerospace, he has Space Adventures, and I'm sure it's like a few more people that are, will start buying seats from him. As
no doubt.
And so then it doesn't matter. It's like, well, NASA might buy 2 seats, 2 trips this year or not, but we have these other 3 or 4 people doing stuff. Really exciting. It's a Bigelow Aerospace. Have you heard anything about them? I know they were really, they launched 2 kind of prototype inflatable or expandable modules in the past 2 decades. And, they were really pitching coming up with the habitat. And they even talked about having a contract to SpaceX, but then the COVID-19 thing happened. It looked like they laid off everybody, and I really haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything since the pandemic and them having to shut their doors, which is unfortunate, but is kind of part and parcel with this global environment that we're in right now, because they are, or were, a small business. What was personally frustrating to watch with them was they had success with their demo modules that they just launched into orbit. I forget the name. They had great success with the beam module that is mounted onto ISS and is, I believe, actually being used now. It's been a year completely vacant while they tested it to make sure it would hold up the way they thought it would. And then the astronauts are allowed to actually stow things in it, which is fantastic. But then I didn't hear really anything from Bigelow Aerospace since then. And I knew that there were plans for an Olympus module, 2,100 cubic meters of interior space, which is roughly the size of a 3-bedroom house in the US, which is phenomenal. There had been some talk for a while of linking some B330s, which are 330 cubic meters a pop, into a ring in order to be able to do a rotating habitat, just like what I was pitching earlier on in this call. But I never heard any of that really get off the ground. It was all, oh, we're totally going to do this. Here's some renderings. Never any numbers. I saw a life-size mock-up of the Olympus module. I've seen a few photos over the years, but I don't know that any of them were really actually recent. I don't know if it's fully fledged inside. I don't know what the holdups were. They just seemed to have kind of stalled, and that was really hard to watch because I'd had such high hopes.
Yeah, I know I had high hopes too, and he was like really big about, you know, we need to get to the moon. There's like some international interest there. If we don't go, we may not be able to go at some point. And you know, he's really a big proponent early on in the like the current administration's period about investing in the space. And it seems like now we have the investment and they've kind of disappeared. It's just kind of ironic. But. So do you think we're gonna, what would it take for us to actually land on the moon in 2024?
I don't think we're that far away from it because we've got the Crew Dragon capsule. The Orion capsule is nearly done. The big hang up that we're seeing is the rockets that will get those capsules there, which of course Crew Dragon can go on Falcon Heavy, tried and tested, ready to go, but SLS has gotten far enough that there are certain leaders in government that are unwilling to let it go, despite the fact that it's so far behind. And thanks to the pandemic, falling even farther behind. So in order to be able to land on the moon in 2024, we need a descent module, an ascent module, or possibly one vessel, the same, which I think is NASA's current goal, one vessel that can do both. And we need a rocket that can get people to the place where they can berth with the ascent descent modules and actually do that. And in order to test the ascent and descent modules, that's probably a year, 6 months to practice rendezvous. So that's 18 months. That gets us halfway through 2022, which means we need to have whatever rocket we're going to use fully designed, built, and tested by June of 2022, which is only 2 years away, which is a very tight turnaround for SLS. So I think I would like to see that contract open back up to competition and see companies like SpaceX, like Blue Origin, able to vie for it. Because I don't have a lot of confidence that SLS is going to be able to achieve that milestone.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like Jim Bridenstine, the current NASA administrator, tweeted out that in terms of delivering materials to the surface of the moon, they're going to have like a price per ton and then leave it up to the marketplace and independent companies to figure out how to do that. That's quite a bit different than saying unlimited checkbook and, you know, you have no competition.
Yeah, no competition is the worst way to go about innovation because it leads to things like SLS, which is using shuttle technology, which, considering the shuttle was designed in the 70s, 30 years ago, a full human generation ago, is disconcerting.
Yeah, and the Soyuz is literally the same craft they've been using for what, 40 years at this point? It's just been very minor modifications over.
Yeah, it does have the advantage of a ridiculous level of reliability. So that's good. I'm not sure what modifications would need to be done to it in order to get it all the way to a lunar insertion orbit, but that would be another avenue I'd be very willing to explore if we need to get some competition in there and light some fires under some butts.
Yeah, that was really interesting. The VP's speech last year, whenever he announced the 2024 goal, he said, you know, if our current slate of contractors aren't up to it, then we need to get ones that are. We need to change the, you know, change the way we do it, not the mission. So I think that really stirred some action initially.
It did. I think it stirred a lot of reactionism around the people that have invested in SLS. And a certain amount of that is just emotional investment. But there's also a fair amount of economic investment just from the number of jobs that there are involved in that and where those jobs are and what a portion of the job market in that community partakes of that. It's going to be really challenging to actually give NASA the freedom to move away from SLS.
So I've done about 200 of these interviews, and my plan was to originally interview non-space people, like go up to people in Starbucks and in the mall and, you know, the airports and at the museums. Of course, going up to people in today's day and age is probably not recommended. So I've turned to doing them online, and I've expanded the group to include anybody that's willing to do an interview, so including space people. So, but out of the 200 interviews I have, do you know, could you guess about how many of them actually knew we were planning to go to the moon in 2024?
Oh my goodness, I would have hoped for all 200, but I did watch one of them to get a feel for what the format would be like. And I know that she was not aware. I'm just gonna go right down the middle and guess 100.
Yeah, probably closer to 30.
That's terrifying. Okay. I wonder how much of that has to do with the news cycle and the need for news outlets to sell copy. And this is just, we've allowed space to become routine already. And so it's not news that we're developing this. I think my suspicion is that it made a big splash when it was announced. And then life went on because it was too long of a goal. And now even the people that saw the news have simply forgotten, which is unfortunate. And that's where it's down to people like you and me to help keep the word out there.
Very, very possibly. But you mentioned news cycle, which is kind of interesting because like between 1969 and now, the way we keep up on current events and news has changed profoundly.
Absolutely.
I mean, in 1969, we had 3 broadcast TVs. Every major city had like 1 or 2 newspapers. There were only a few nationwide periodicals. And pretty much, if you had something in all of those, everybody would see it.
Yeah.
But,
and the mental impact that a front page article had, I think, lasted a lot longer because it wasn't going to be until the next day at best that something else came in to supplant it. And now the length of time that an impression has to stay on our consciousness is so much briefer because it's 24/7.
Oh, exactly. And so like, how do you consume the news? Like, what news sources do you look at?
Oh, goodness. I'm not great about consuming the news because so much of it is so stressful. I've had to really back away. I see some of it on Facebook. I have the Reuters app on my phone. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I try really hard to stick to news outlets that are more centrist because there's so much out there that's really polarizing, and it's the polarizing stuff that's hard on my heart. So I've not been completely successful at finding anybody that only reports the facts with no spin. I'm not sure that's even humanly possible. but I've gone about as far as a working mom has time to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, ultimately, you do need a narrative in
Hmm.
order for it to be a news story, and narratives have to make choices about what to include, what direction to send it. It's really kind of difficult. I mean, I think the best you can hope for is to have two conflicting narratives side by side almost. Maybe that's what no spin looks like.
Yeah, that's a method that I tried for a while, but it got so different, so disparate that it was really hard to pick out the narrative. And I was working in a fairly stressful job at the time. I just didn't have the mental oomph to go for it. So I abandoned that approach.
That makes sense. And plus, you know, one downside of having two conflicting narratives side by side makes it seem like what you want to believe is a matter of choice as opposed to being fact-based and some type of reality outside, you know,
Ooh,
some type of independent reality, you know. So that could be kind of bad also. Um,
definitely, yeah.
I imagine like your newsfeed and my newsfeed probably look very similar because we're both very big space people. But I, I've talked to some people. In fact, one said, "Why is NASA keeping it a secret that we're going back to the moon in 2024?" So his newsfeed looks completely different than ours.
My goodness, yeah.
So, but what do you think is an effective way to sort of, you know, kind of get across to people who may not be seeing it in their normal news feed? I mean, how do you kind of reach into those bubbles?
I think that trying to treat it as news might not actually be the right approach, because so much of what is being done to achieve the milestone is really kind of ordinary behind the scenes work. It isn't actually news. Doing it, getting the rocket on the launch pad, that's going to be news. Selecting the astronauts to go, that's going to be news. But um, Jane Citizen working in her lab in her clean suit is not news. So I think a more effective tactic would kind of be to leverage social media, which my social media is mostly Facebook, just because I only have the time and energy for one. And that's what I've had for umpteen years, so I'm used to it. But a lot of times the stuff that shows up in my feed is something that was liked or interacted with by someone that I know. And so if I'm out there liking and sharing space posts, then everyone in my friend group is exposed to that. And some of them will click on it themselves, will like it themselves, will write a comment. And then that exposes their friends to it. And it's kind of a diffusion effect. But I think that trying to compete with the news cycle, particularly in a time like this where there is so much genuinely urgent news happening in the world, is probably not the right approach.
That makes sense. Yeah, and you know, I think you're right because pretty much since DM2, uh, pretty much everyone I've talked to since then is aware of it, and that was like news and a real event. And we even had other very much competing news happening then, and they were still aware of the DM2.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think whenever we have our first SLS launch, you know, that's going to be a big boost. And whenever we have, you know, next year with like intuitive machines and astrobotics actually land probes on the moon, I mean, those are going to be big news events.
Yes.
Uh, and that may really help. It'd be interesting to see how these interviews go around and after those events. And hopefully by that point, I'm actually talking to random people at the coffee shop again.
Oh, fingers crossed.
So pretty much after I tell people that we're going to the moon, I would say like 80% of them are very supportive of it. And, you know, 20% I would say aren't. You know, you have like your standard, why are we going into the moon when we have all these other problems here on Earth? But for the 80%, they're like, we got plenty of people, we could do both at the same time. Why is one held hostage to the other? That kind of makes sense. But the other a reason that I hear from people not to go to the moon, it's a very small percentage, but I've heard it from enough that, and it was something I wasn't expecting, was essentially it could be summed up in the phrase, we've messed up the Earth, why should we mess up the moon too? I was just wondering what you thought about that.
They're completely different environments. In fact, if I'm going to get technical, I would question the moon being an environment, because there's no life, there's no organics, no biotics in existence. So the only messing up of the moon that we could do would be to harvest it so thoroughly that there isn't any moon anymore. And that would take millions of years, particularly when you consider that the stuff the moon is made of is not conducive for life. It's only conducive for hardware. And even for as vast a population as we have, there's only a certain level of need for hardware. In addition, the intent in the space community, and even in the science fiction community, which is potentially much broader, has never been to thoroughly settle and colonize the moon and make it Earth 2, if you will. It's always been have colonies on the moon, settle it somewhat, mine it somewhat, but mainly it's a launching pad. I think there's always been a consciousness that the moon is part of the Earth, philosophically, spiritually, even though not physically, obviously. And so it's more of the front porch to go colonize Mars, to go colonize and mine the asteroids, to get out to the Jovian moons and the Saturn moons. I don't think there's ever been an intent to ravage the moon or to take any action that would lead to ravaging the moon. By the time we got to the actual Apollo missions, the space race had already sparked such a significant sense of environmentalism and caring for our planet Earth, such a sense of how delicate she really is. I don't think there's any danger of that. And I think, in fact, going back to the moon can have a lot of ripple effects and a lot of new technologies that will, in fact, make us less damaging to the Earth than we are with all the progress that we've made over the intervening 50 years.
That reflects my view as well, which is why that view kind of caught me off guard. It felt like, I mean, some people have kind of expanded on it into, you don't know what you don't know. We think the moon is lifeless, but we also thought it was dry desert at one time, and now there's ice in the pole, and you're like, well, where we have water ice, maybe there's liquid water in some lava tubes, and we weren't expecting life in the deep part of the oceans around like sulfur vents either. So I'm not saying it's a reason not to go, but maybe it's a reason to go with lots of questions and self-reflection and kind of at least be open to the possibility that we're going to learn new stuff, and some of that new stuff may be very, very surprising.
Yeah, and I think we will learn new stuff, and I think some of that new stuff will be very surprising. It's going to be very interesting to see. But I definitely think that the people you've interviewed that have that fear are not giving us enough credit for the progress we've made.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that narrative of humans are bad, humans are bad, humans are bad. Maybe we don't want humans to go to live forever or to expand out into the solar system. It's almost, in some circles, that narrative has been so reinforced that it almost leads to that very extreme view.
I think for a lot of human history, humans have been bad, like bad for the environment. But, and maybe this is just having read so much science fiction and stuff that's set thousands of years in the future, but I have kind of a longer view of it. And humanity was in its infancy for so long. And then somewhere in the Middle Ages, learned to walk and started doing some more damage just from lack of understanding. Just like your kid that just learned to walk at 13 months old accidentally punches holes in things, accidentally tears up the paper that you were working on, just exploring and not knowing. And then potentially with the Industrial Revolution, full toddlerdom, temper tantrums, and wanton destruction just from, oh, I can do this, and no context to think about whether or not I should. And by this point, I think we're at least tweens, if not teenagers. And we've learned that actions have consequences. And we've learned that there are things that are wrong and things that are right. And we try mostly to do things that are right. And I don't think we're actually bad anymore. We've never been evil, just uneducated.
That's true. Now, of the people that are, kind of enthusiastic or excited or glad that we're going back, a significant portion of them do have questions of what benefits does it have for us? I mean, like, what do we hope to get out of it? And how do you approach that conversation?
Oh, we've already gotten so much from space exploration. I don't have the right imagination to make any predictions of what we will get beyond things that we've already conceptualized, such as space elevators, in which case we wouldn't need to use chemical rockets anymore, space-based solar power, so 100% clean, continuous energy. But a lot of the new developments, new inventions and changes we won't see for 5, 10, 15 years after we get boots on the moon. But think about this guy. My cell phone, which has, if I remember right, 256 gigabytes of storage space. And think about the size of the computers that took us to the moon. It filled an entire room and had, what, 1,000th of this power and this space? And going to space, the need to continue to go to space, is a big part of what drove those increases in efficiency and increases in space, miniaturization, that have led us down the path to this that fits in my hand and is a couple of orders more powerful, orders of magnitude more powerful than ENIAC was. And the potentials that are out there are limitless. And that's a word that gets overused, but I do legitimately mean limitless. And we won't know the directions we go with it and which paths we take until we get there in a sustainable way. We get there and we stay there and we know what we need and what's available. But there's so much out there. Infinite. Maybe we'll be able to develop teleportation and then it won't be 6 days to get to the moon anymore.
And how about some people who say, haven't we already been to the moon? Why are we going back? What are your thoughts there?
That's always a personally frustrating one for me, because my knee-jerk reflex is, why wouldn't we? So trying to understand a viewpoint so different and articulate an argument against it is challenging. It's just a fabric of my being that obviously would go. But there are so many resources available there that would so significantly reduce our need to mine from Earth and disrupt local ecologies that way. And then there are geopolitical questions, such as, that's kind of the ultimate high ground. Should, God forbid, knock on wood, But should there be another war, it would be Moon as a harsh mistress style, with being able to just drop rocks and achieve domination that way, as well as geopolitical concerns about mineral sources. A lot of the minerals used in making my phone, the rare earth minerals that are so powerful in computing in general, are something like 90% controlled by China and Russia, with whom historically our political relationship has been very queasy. But there is a school of thought that believes that those rare earth minerals are, if not plentiful, at least well supplied on the moon. So if we go up and we establish a base and we can get them from there, we don't have to worry about what Russia and China think of us and whether they're going to take that supply off the table. There is the relief of population pressure, the relief of emotional pressure. With all of the craziness that has gone on in 2020 this year, every month a new thing that is upending our lives as we know them and our worldview as we know it. I've started wishing that I had the ability to just pick up the family and go to some space colony, start fresh, go the Rolling Stones, or else that it was the 1840s and we could get in our covered wagon and go west. Just leave it all behind and start over. And space gives us a lot of flexibility to do that, where there is no place uninhabited like that on Earth anymore. So it would relieve, I think, a lot of psychic pressure on a lot of people, because they want to go, they want to leave, they want to start something new, and there isn't anywhere to start something new anymore.
I think it's really, hard for people to really accept that as being a possibility. But I think whenever you see SpaceX's Starship making daily trips to orbit, weekly trips to the moon, every 2-year trips to Mars, and it just becomes routine, and essentially it's just like catching a train or something else. And you could imagine, a family choosing to immigrate, or somebody sending an experiment, or sending materials back and forth. Once you kind of have that routine supply system there, I mean, it's just like so much can grow up around it, and it enables so much too.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you thought that was going to be the big game changer, or if you saw something else on the horizon.
I think that there are kind of going to be 3 prongs to going and to making it present in the general consciousness that we are going and that we can go. And some of that is going to be research, and having regular research on the moon, on Mars, and not just what looks like a tiny cramped laboratory on ISS. Everyone tells me that it's more spacious, but I just see the photos that look like they barely hold 2 people. And being an American and from the Southwest particularly, that just does not look like enough room to me. And then mineral resources, and being able to send those back for use, or to use them out in space for building and manufacture. And then tourism is going to be the first leg of the third. Maybe I should turn that into 4, because with people regularly going back and forth, even without actual immigration, expanding that consciousness, expanding our worldview to include life on the moon, life in orbit, life on Mars, out in the asteroids. It's going to just incrementally expand our horizons. I think we need a new word for that, because horizons are not going to apply anymore.
Our sphere's surface area, maybe.
There you go.
The bubble space, or whatever. I guess, I mean, what's your NSS chapter doing now to do outreach in this whole lockdown pandemic thing? Like, how have you all adapted to actually reach people?
It's been really hard. I've been trying to stay active on Facebook, on our Facebook page, which I am not sure I've been as active as I could have been. But most of the organizations that we have had that relationship with to do presentations and to have a physical presence, I don't think have been able to do a lot of virtual things. So it's really hindered our ability to do outreach. And we haven't really come up with any ideas to generate events to do outreach in the community that are completely virtual. It's a challenging time, to be sure. I think we've just really fallen back on our social media presence. We have someone who is active on Twitter, or who manages our Twitter account. I assume he's active. I don't do Twitter, so I don't know. I can't speak to that. But I think he's been working on it. So it's a really challenging time in terms of outreach, definitely.
I've been kind of brainstorming about ideas, and one thing that came to mind was maybe a piece of yard art. I was thinking making a full-size replica of like Intuitive Machines Nova C lander, or maybe of Astrobotics Peregrine lander with like a countdown clock. And it's like, go here to find out more, and you could put in like somebody's yard for a week and then move it to a different yard and move it to a different yard. Just thought that might be an idea. People drive by and go, what's that? You know, it's like,
I like that idea. That's really interesting. I'll bring it up in our meeting this afternoon, our conference call.
We just need to find people who are skilled at such things.
Yes, definitely. That's a challenging part. My son has a lot of Lego.
I mean, to make the thing out of Legos is a whole nother dimension.
Right.
You know? I mean, I went to the Kennedy Space Center on the Thursday after the original DM2 launch was scheduled for, because we had driven there to watch it, but then it got delayed for cancel. And then Kennedy Space Center opened limitedly the next day, and they had a it was one of the first two rovers, not the first two, you know, the one that they Opportunity and Spirit. So they had like an Opportunity rover made out of Legos, like full scale. I know, it's kind of cool. But
that's, yeah.
Well, so any advice for what I should be asking people about space?
I think you've really kind of got the general themes, which is finding out if they're already interested in it, aware of what's going on. If you find someone who is more interested in robotic exploration instead of settlement like me, then you'd be able to talk to them about the various rovers on Mars, about the Cassini mission, about the upcoming Europa Clipper. And there's another one, I can't remember if it's got a formal name yet, that's going to be going back to Titan with a hopper, which is very exciting and very cool. So yeah, no, and finding out what they think about what we should be doing in regards to space exploration, things of that nature. No, I can't think of anything off the top of my head to do differently, really.
Well, it sounds good. I really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much. This has been really exciting and a lot of fun.
Well, I'll go ahead and stop the recording then.